in the mainstream era. What about independent journalism nowadays? Anyone can start a Substack, a newsletter, and start a publication and take the audience. Like, for example, Taylor Lawrence has done this brilliantly from the Washington Post. She's my go-to source for all about pop culture and the internet culture. So, like this, when everyone has access to creating their own, what do you call it, newsletter or a YouTube channel or a source of dissemination, what does a consumer faced with so many choices, how does he tackle that or she tackle that going forward?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that I feel like a lot of people, now we have this kind of plethora of choices, like you said. I think for me, and I'd love to know what he thinks, is that I started thinking of this as like what we used to look at op-eds for. Like, I mean, a lot of people are able to get huge following by sharing their take on things, and I think it's important. So I think Taylor Lawrence is great. Like Kara Swisher, when she decided to just do, for all the tech stuff, like have her own podcast and leave legacy media. The more voices, the better. My only concern as a former journalist is, and this is actually where TV news in India is also letting us down. If you talk to any of the sort of older sort of reporters, and legacy media no longer seems to have the budget or appetite to go out and gather news. So
what's it called, legacy media? What does that mean?
New age media.
Dead?
It's dying.
So you mean newspapers?
Break it to you. But even the TV news channels.
And TV.
Yeah. So, well, the reach now of digital is so much more. And I mean, for example, even our Prime Minister will give interviews to YouTube influencers who have a much bigger reach, right? And so I think my only concern with this is we've actually equated news with content, conflated news with content and opinion, and there's an audience for all of that. But who's actually going to go out and report the stories that no one's actually invested in reporting? A lot of the big events of the world, as they unfold, a lot of the whistleblowers, a lot of the things we know about what's going wrong in the world is thanks to journalists going out and actually talking to sources, and for a lot of folks who have a Substack or newsletter, you don't actually have those kind of budgets to go out and do that. So I also love that a lot of journalists have done this because they're also diversifying, and I love that journalists think like business people also, because you do need to understand what the revenue model is. But I worry that we are conflating news with content or opinion. And we all have a hot take, but we're not necessarily sure who the source is, like who's actually going out and doing the sort of news gathering.
That's a key question. But also, to return to your point, there's almost like an overwhelm. There's too much. And to that, I would just say, for your own sanity, just come and sit down in a library and read a legacy source of news. Like, just sit down and read some words on a page.
A library like this one,
yeah,
clearly.
Just a break, I think, for our own sanity. But maybe that makes me super old school. I don't know.
No, but I feel like you can do both, right? Like, I mean, you can get access to. I mean, find the news source you like and trust, and get a few dissenting opinions. But I do think this is the future, honestly. Like, it doesn't look like this is a trend that's going away either. Like, more and more journalists, want to set up their YouTube or Substack or newsletters. There is overwhelm, and I feel like the business model for anyone interested is like curating well. So if you're like, instead of going to just Taylor Lawrence, you have someone who's like, okay, you're the top 5 newsletters, and my friend Tanmoy does this for mental health. Sanity has a really good recommendation thing. So you'll see more and more emphasis placed on smart editorial curation. But I don't know what the sort of future of the news business is.
I'm just really glad you were here to answer that question.
It's a good question. Also, legacy media being the new, and professional media being the two phrases we need to.
Legacy media, is that a kind of slur against journalists?
It's not a slur, it's just that this instant, well, I guess it's like it's not a slur, it's just a way of distinguishing like old-fashioned media from new age media, I guess, right? Okay. Which is no longer new age anymore.
No. But, I think you make a really important point about those big investigations uncovering what happened with Epstein, for example. That was uncovered by the LA Times, I believe, or by a journalist that just kept on going back, a woman journalist, her name escapes me now, but she just kept on going back to that story. When he was cleared of the allegations, she just kept on the story. And you don't really do that unless you belong to some other organisation. And it's resulted in them uncovering a horrific story, a horrific network of abuse. We do need them.
We need more revenue sources for these to be sustainable.
Yeah.
Do we have time for one more question?
Coming back to your main theme, would you be kind enough to both of you to let us know what was that
moment or that event in your life which acted as a catalyst for you to transform from a journalist to a fiction writer?
Well, I wrote my first novel while I was working as a journalist, so I feel like I always knew I was going to be a writer. Like, I have a very embarrassing file. When I was 15, it was my autobiography, and it was kind of like, I knew I was going to be a journalist and a writer, and I feel like at one point I'm like, hey, you did both. But I was able to write fiction while working, so I didn't have to choose at that time between the two.
You knew when you were 15? That's so impressive.
I mean, it just worked out that way. Not worked out that way, but it was sort of, my parents reminded me of this. I knew I want to be a writer and a journalist, though. It's one of those things.
Are you? So, I do remember, in terms of those moments, I had a critical moment, which was into just the world of books, which previously was like a kind of shimmering, distant kingdom for me. I didn't know how anyone could enter that world. But I was a journalist at BBC World Service, and I, during the Iraq War, made kind of friends online with a woman in Iraq. You know, my country had invaded her country. She had lots to say about that. We became email friends, and this resulted in a book. It sort of accidentally became a book. And the result of the book was that she was then, she now lives in the UK.
It's such a good book. I just read it last year. Talking about
Jane
Austen in Baghdad.
Jane Austen in Baghdad, terrible title, but it is a lovely book. It's a true story, and it's the account of my life in London and her life in Iraq and trying to get her out. And that, I suppose, propelled her to live in the UK and me into a world of books. So it was a bit of a win for both of us.
Yeah.
That's how it happened.
That's wonderful. Thank you.